Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Being grounded and centered in the midpoint of the circle. In the midpoint of the circle. I have not been grounded and centered. What do I mean by that? Common expression, grounded and centered. Until recently, I have never considered its implications. To me, being grounded is vertical. Being centered is horizontal, meaning it is the midpoint. And to be grounded and centered is to remain in that midpoint, because that is the way we can observe the entire circle. Otherwise, it is easy to get distracted, to stand on one of the edges of the circle, and by standing on an edge, we lose track of the entire picture. Sadly, what I now recognize is that for the last 8 months or more, I have been standing on the edge of a circle as a Maoist third worldist. And I realize that if I want to be a good Maoist third worldist, a productive Maoist third worldist, a productive socialist from below, third worldist, fourth worldist, that I need to be in the midpoint. If I am not, I will miss the bigger picture. And to use a term that I really don't like, I will not be holistic. I won't say exactly why I don't like it right now. It'll be a distraction. If you want to know, look up the history of the term holism, and you can find out. That term does not have a very good history, but nonetheless, I think it fits right now. And so I do not ordinarily refer to holism. I do not ordinarily refer to my life as holistic, but I think I should now, at least for the time being, because I have not been holistic. I have been distracted. What have I been distracted by? Well, for those of you who have been watching this podcast, you know, I have been distracted by Gaza. I have been distracted by the presidential race in the United States between Trump and Biden. I have been distracted by the threats of violence that are coming from the extreme right, the MAGA people, the Trump supporters in the United States, and how, regardless of whether Trump wins or loses, there will be tremendous upheavals, I think, next year. And undoubtedly, there will be upheavals this year as well. These next 2 years, whatever is left of this year, along with 2025, and I suspect beyond that, are not going to be very pleasant. Especially if you are an American. But even beyond the United States, given the global reach of American imperialism, the major contradiction of capitalism. When America suffers, the world as a whole suffers as well. So, I want to be grounded and centered. I want to stand at the midpoint of the circle and rotate around while standing in one place, in that midpoint, so I can see everything happening around me. Again, I have not been doing that. I have focused too much on Gaza and too much on the US. That is a hard thing for me to say because I regard what's happening in Gaza as the Holocaust of the 21st century, a genocide, a true genocide that is being supported by the President of the United States, although now maybe he is having some second thoughts, perhaps driven by his declining poll numbers, at least for a while. Trump obviously has his own share of problems with his multiple convictions, which of course his lawyers will appeal. It is unknown whether those appeals will be successful. Generally, criminal appeals are not, but we are not dealing with just any criminal. We are dealing with a former and possibly future president of the United States. And so how an appeals court treats an appeal from the lawyers of President Donald Trump is unknown, because it is a truly unprecedented situation. But again, by focusing so much on the corruption in West Asia, on the corruption in the United States and in the first world, I have lost sight of the overriding issue. And that overriding issue is the need for the capitalist world system to end. There is a need for the end of first world dominance, which supports the capitalist world system and keeps the third and fourth worlds in chains. In order for people in the third and fourth worlds to break free of their chains, I believe that the capitalist world system must first go away, actually go away. There are minimal things that can be done right now. Minimal, very minimal, very minimal. What happened? What happened in the 20th century? We had two major experiments in revolutionary socialism. One became the Soviet Union. The other became the People's Republic of China. There is no more Soviet Union, and the People's Republic of China, mainland China, exists in name only. It is not a People's Republic anymore, and has not been for some time. I would say that, in my opinion, the beginning of the end for the People's Republic of China was with the visit of President Richard Nixon to China and his meeting with Chairman Mao and the opening up of the industrialized world to Mao and to China, when the United States decided that it would no longer recognize the independence of the Republic of China, now commonly called Taiwan. So China failed. The Soviet Union failed as well. Why? Well, because of the dominance of the capitalist world system. It crushed Mao with Nixon's help. It crushed the Soviet Union, leading to the economic defeat of that Soviet Union, and ultimately to Mikhail Gorbachev dissolving the Soviet Union and becoming, I'm not sure if you would say friends, but certainly acquaintances, allies to a limited degree with Richard Nixon, which is kind of hard for me to imagine. How could a revolutionary socialist leader become an ally or a friend or whatever, and even a close acquaintance with the greatest enemy of communism that perhaps the United States has ever known? I don't know. But that's what happened. So those two major bastions of revolutionary socialism are gone. They are gone. You can argue that communism or revolutionary socialism still exists to a degree in some places, like in Cuba. But even there, it is declining. In Vietnam, which the United States fought an entire war over, killing so many people. And for what? For nothing. For absolutely nothing. Now, the United States and Vietnam are trading partners. Vietnam is a tourist destination for Americans. Relations between the US and Vietnam are friendly. What a total waste. A total waste. I remember that war. Almost, not quite, but almost from beginning to end. The beginning, I was a bit too young, but the middle and the end, I remember like it was yesterday. That was the center of attention back in those days. That captivated the world. The war in Vietnam, or more broadly, the Indochina War, incorporating Laos and Cambodia as well. Now it is Gaza. Now it is the United States with Trump and Biden. But I think we need to be grounded and centered. Again, grounded and centered. Standing in the midpoint of the circle, not deterred by temporary fixations that the media turns to, however important those fixations might be. The media has justifiably turned to Gaza, even though the Western media, in particular, the American media, have not been presenting a fair picture of what is happening in Gaza, have been taking the side of the assailant and not the assailed for the most part. And in the lands of the assailant, people who have made even slight criticisms or who have liked postings on X, formerly Twitter, have been arrested and blindfolded and taken to who knows where. But that's just part of what's happening in the world. And I am making this podcast episode as a pledge that although I will obviously continue discussing Gaza and the US and Israel, they will not dominate my discussions exclusively, as for the most part they have been doing over the last several months, making me so angry to the point where I wondered why people that I know could even visit Israel. I had a close friend, still a friend of sorts, but in social media world, not in real life anymore, who is a very, very staunch Zionist. I've mentioned him before and his family. Two members of my former friend's family or current friend's family, whatever you want to call him, are serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, one on the battlefield and one in an office job. And both of them are American citizens. And I said to myself, how could anyone do that? Anyone. And yet, here I am in the US, the land of the most powerful military in the world today, even though it has not been acting like it. But at least in terms of capability, the most powerful military in the world. Oppressing other nations, losing one war after another, but in the meantime, killing countless people in Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen. And I have not sufficiently, in my view, been critical of myself, because I live here. I have made the excuse, well, I am an old man, and I guess at 68, that could be argued that I am an old man, not as old as some, but not as young as many, not as young as most, actually. So being of the age I am when moving abroad is really not realistic, but still failing to critique myself sufficiently for however unlikely it is that I will be able to move abroad, for the fact that nevertheless, I do live here. Occasionally, I will pass military people in the street, and I have not thought to myself, are these people better than the IDF? I won't answer that question. I will simply ask it. But then we have stories of the atrocities which took place in Afghanistan, the atrocities which took place at Camp Gitmo, the acts of terrorism performed by the American military. And so for me to focus so much on the IDF to the exclusion, really the exclusion of the US military, I can't think of a time before in this podcast when I have mentioned the US military. And why? The answer again is simple. Because I have not been standing at the midpoint of the circle. I have not been vertically grounded, and I have not been horizontally centered. And as a result, I have allowed the events of the world right now to distract me. But as a Maoist third worldist, I cannot afford to be distracted for many reasons. One of the main ones, which I have mentioned before, is that there are so few of us. Maybe you are a Maoist third worldist. How many people do you know who are Maoist third worldists? 3, 4, 5, 10 maybe? There are not that many of us. We need more Maoist third worldists, given the dominance of first worldism among revolutionary socialists or communists in the world today. And even first worldists, first world communists are not that plentiful. The left is tiny in the US. Tiny, very, very tiny. Since the end of the Black Panther movement, which was the last phase of the New Left. Sometimes that last phase called the New Communist Movement. The left has basically been crushed. New Left magazine exists, but that is only a relic of the New Left. A New Left that was inspired to a significant degree by the work of C. Wright Mills, who himself was not really even a Marxist. Not really a Marxist. Certainly not a communist. But he was a major person that people in my generation, the baby boomers, looked up to. He became a champion of my movement, an inspiration for it, but then it died. It died. As did the Occupy movement die. As did the BLM movement die. Hopefully, the BDS movement, hopefully, the anti-Zionist movement does not die as well. But I suspect it will if the past is a prediction of the future, and we know that is not true literally ever, but certainly we can look at trends. It is hard to sustain a movement beyond a very short time. People get distracted. It is very easy to get distracted, especially in the first world. There are many things around us which are distractions. Television, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, there are many distractions. And so I have gotten distracted, but my source of distraction did not come from outside of me. It came from inside of me by my focusing so much on Gaza, so much on the US, especially after Trump's multiple felony convictions, to the exclusion of the rest of the world. So have I been a Maoist third worldist? In a way, but in a way not. Because I have only been looking at a tiny portion, a limited portion of the world. I have truly been what Herbert Marcuse referred to as a one-dimensional man. And no communist of whatever tendency can be one-dimensional. To be one-dimensional is a recipe for failure. And so I don't know if I have failed. Not quite, I don't think. I look back on the things I've said. I don't disagree with anything I have said. But my view is that I have said what I have said to the exclusion of everything else. And that is not helpful. And so again, I will make a commitment here and now not to do that anymore. That is not to say that much or even most of my attention will not be on Gaza and the presidential election this year, this November in the US. But I will also not forget the rest of the world. And forgetting the rest of the world made me so angry. While my anger, I think, should have been more evenly or more fairly, perhaps, more justly distributed. Because however evil may dominate West Asia, however evil may dominate the United States, evil is not limited to West Asia and the United States. Evil is global, and that is what I have forgotten. So I make this episode of my podcast while standing at the midpoint of the circle. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.